They think life is a game of choices, don't they? They sit in their fancy chairs, shaking hands, signing papers, thinking they hold the strings. They made a deal for your son, like he's just another piece on their chessboard. But here's the thing, deals are fragile. Promises, even more so. And sometimes, the ones who think they're safe, who think they're clever, are the ones who don't even see the storm coming. They sit there, in their polished offices, hands shaking, smiles wide, nodding like they're solving the world's problems, thinking they're clever. They make deals as if life were a board game, and every person, every soul, is just a token to move across the squares. They don't see the cracks in their own plans, the invisible threads that tie them to consequences they can't even imagine. They imagine control, absolute control, as if signing papers and whispering words under golden chandeliers somehow bends reality to their will. But the universe has a way of laughing at people like that. You see, they think the deal is theirs to dictate. They think because they wrote the terms, because they orchestrated the conditions, they are the masters of fate. They think the dice always roll in their favor. They think power resides in signatures, in contracts, in secrecy. But control, real control, is an illusion, a delicate trick performed on those naive enough to believe in it. They act like puppeteers, pulling strings, manipulating outcomes, believing that their hands can shape life's narrative. Every word they speak is calculated, every gesture measured, every pause deliberate. They imagine they are architects of destiny, builders of outcomes. But what they fail to understand is that life doesn't answer to contracts. Life doesn't bend to the cleverness of men in suits. Life laughs in the faces of those who believe they are untouchable. They think the deal is a fortress, a shield, a guarantee. But a fortress is built of stone, and human ambition is lightning. They think they control everything because they've made arrangements in secret. They think the world dances to the tune of their schemes. But the world has its own rhythm, its own chaos. And chaos doesn't need permission. They think that by deciding the rules of engagement, by signing papers that claim ownership over choices, they can dictate the flow of events. They think outcomes can be bottled, wrapped, and stored neatly on a shelf. They think the future is a ledger to be balanced, a calculation to be solved. But control is a ghost. It slips through fingers like smoke, hiding in corners they never notice, waiting for the perfect moment to expose them. They believe in the illusion that their intentions are stronger than consequences. They believe their cunning is a shield against reality. They forget that life is a storm, and storms do not negotiate. They batter, they tear, they reveal. They look at the world through the lens of advantage, thinking that because they engineered a situation, they hold the ultimate power. They smile at their cleverness, at the fact that their deal is in place, that signatures are wet on paper, that promises are whispered into ears that will never repeat them. They think they understand the full picture, that they are players in a controlled environment, that outcomes can be predicted, manipulated, and tamed. They think they are untouchable. But untouchable is a myth for those who cannot see the invisible currents swirling beneath the surface. They cannot see the unseen reactions, the dominoes lined up in silence, the possibilities lurking in shadows. They cannot see that every deal they make sets off ripples, tiny vibrations that grow into waves that can crash over them when they least expect it. And here's the beautiful irony. They are so consumed with the act of controlling, they fail to recognize the one thing they cannot manage: perception. They cannot manage what others see, what others feel, what others decide in the quiet moments when no one is watching. They cannot control determination, the fire that burns unseen in someone who refuses to accept their rules. They cannot control resilience, the stubborn force that pushes back against imposed boundaries. They cannot control the awakening that comes when someone finally realizes the strings are being pulled and decides to cut them. They think the deal is the story's end, but the story is never theirs to write alone. They assume power resides in negotiation tables and closed doors, in whispers and signatures. They assume that because they have planned, the outcome bends to their will. They think life is predictable, programmable, a series of moves and counter moves in a game they alone understand. But they forget power is not in control, it is in influence. Control is an illusion, a mirage for the arrogant. And arrogance has a way of inviting chaos in through the front door, sneaking past security, laughing while it tears the walls down. They fail to see that while they are busy controlling the game, the board itself has already shifted. They fail to see that while they measure moves with precision, unseen forces are rearranging everything around them, changing trajectories, and turning their meticulous plans into fragile paper cranes, easily crushed by the weight of consequences they refuse to acknowledge. They made a deal thinking they control the outcome, and in that thinking lies their greatest mistake, their hidden vulnerability, the seed of their undoing. Every calculated move, every whispered promise, every carefully signed paper is a brick in a structure they believe will shelter them. But it is a house built on sand. They think they dictate the story, but the story is laughing at them, watching them believe in their power, watching them trust the illusion, and waiting for the moment to prove that control was never theirs to hold. They sit in their rooms, counting moves, calculating benefits, thinking that life can be reduced to a series of transactions. They see your son not as a person, not as a living, breathing force of potential, but as a pawn, a token, a commodity to be traded, bought, or leveraged. They think that by moving him around on their invisible board, they are winning, they are clever, they are untouchable. But they forget one simple truth: he is not theirs to command. He is not a card in their hand, a piece on their chessboard, or a number in their ledger. And the moment they forget that, the moment they treat a soul like an object, the cracks begin to appear. The illusions start to crumble, and the consequences creep in like shadows at dusk. They assume control, believing that because they've made a deal, because they've negotiated terms, because they've signed their names with all the authority they think they possess, that they can dictate his path. They don't see the fire within him, the spark that refuses to be contained. They don't see the heartbeat that beats with dreams, with courage, with defiance. They don't see the life force that cannot be boxed, categorized, or sold. They see only what they want to see: a number, a profit, a bargaining chip, and in that blindness lies their hubris, their vulnerability, their inevitable downfall. They plan in silence. They whisper behind closed doors. They believe the world will bend to their design, that the future is theirs to shape like clay. But your son is not clay. He is not a structure they can mold, not a system they can manipulate, not a resource they can exploit. He is chaos wrapped in potential, a storm waiting to break free, a force that does not follow rules, contracts, or expectations. They don't realize that life, when it chooses, does not negotiate. Life, when it wakes up in someone who refuses to be controlled, breaks the chains and rewrites the story on its own terms. They make decisions as if he were an object, but objects obey. People do not. People breathe, think, resist, and fight. People remember. People awaken. They underestimate the power of recognition, the moment when he sees that he is being treated as a commodity, that his life, his future, his choices have been discussed and decided without him. And the awakening is never gentle. It is never polite. It rips through the illusion they have built, tearing their confidence, shaking the foundation of their supposed control, exposing them to a force they cannot calculate, cannot measure, cannot predict. They imagine that a contract, a deal, a signature on a piece of paper is enough to bind reality. They imagine that their cleverness can circumvent truth, that their schemes can bypass the essence of life itself. But they forget that life is more cunning, more unpredictable, more resilient than any plan. Your son's presence in the world is not a token to be traded, not a pawn to be played, not a prize to be won. He is a living variable, a spark of unpredictability, a reminder that human spirit cannot be bought, cannot be controlled, cannot be cornered. And the arrogance of thinking otherwise is the very thing that blinds them to the storm building at the edge of their vision. They measure, they manipulate, they calculate, thinking that because they control the context, they control the outcome. They think that by removing choice, by dictating terms, by making silent deals, they have created certainty. But certainty is a fragile thing when it encounters defiance. He is not a piece on a board. He is not a number on a balance sheet. He is a presence, a force, a mind that cannot be contained. And the moment they believe otherwise, the moment they assume ownership of something that cannot be owned, they invite chaos, resistance, and a reckoning that they cannot anticipate. They underestimate the layers that make him whole, the experiences that shape him, the instincts that guide him, the inner strength that refuses to bow. They cannot see that life is not linear, that spirit is not programmable, that courage is not negotiable. They assume he will follow the rules they impose, that he will fit neatly into the scenario they have designed, that he will accept the terms without question. But he will not. He cannot. And that is the beauty they fail to understand. He exists outside their calculations, outside their deals, outside their illusions of control. They treat him like an asset, a resource, a tool, but he is flesh, blood, and mind. He is stories untold, potential unclaimed, energy unbridled. They do not realize that you cannot cage force, that you cannot own will, that you cannot purchase destiny. He moves in ways they cannot predict, thinks in ways they cannot anticipate, reacts in ways they cannot contain. And every plan they make, every deal they sign, every expectation they set becomes a fragile illusion in the face of what he is capable of. They believe that deals and strategies give them dominion over lives, but they forget that dominion is not ownership. Influence is not control. Authority is not command. And your son, he is a reminder of that truth, a living testament to the fact that the human spirit cannot be bartered, cannot be cornered, cannot be broken by the arrogance of others who mistake power for certainty. Every deal has a price. Every handshake has a shadow. Every signature carries a secret weight that only reveals itself when it's far too late. They sit there, smiling, convinced that the ink on paper can dictate reality, that their clever words and calculated moves are enough to bind life itself. But life Life has a way of sneaking in through the cracks, of showing up where it's least expected, of turning what seems like certainty into chaos. Every deal they make, every promise they whisper, every arrangement they craft in the quiet corners of their world carries consequences they cannot see, consequences they cannot control, consequences that will eventually come knocking with a smile they did not anticipate. They think the deal is simple, linear, contained. They imagine a world where cause and effect are neat, where actions are predictable, where every choice leads directly to the outcome they desire. They do not see the ripples that spread beyond the table, beyond the office, beyond the walls they have built around their little schemes. They do not see that every agreement, every bargain, every whispered negotiation plants seeds in the soil of the future seeds that will sprout, grow, twist, and take forms they cannot anticipate. They think they are writing rules, but in reality, they are setting traps for themselves, leaving breadcrumbs for consequences to follow. They believe the deal is a fortress, a shield, a guarantee of control, but consequences do not ask permission. They do not negotiate. They do not wait. They do not care about intentions or cleverness or arrogance. They are inevitable. Hidden, yes. Invisible at first. Subtle in the beginning, but relentless. And when they arrive with the weight of inevitability, with the power to dismantle plans, with the force to reveal the folly of those who thought themselves untouchable. Every deal is a contract with reality itself, and reality is always ready to collect. They think about gains, about advantages, about how the deal benefits them, about how they win. But they forget the ledger is never empty on the other side. For every gain, there is a shadow. For every advantage, there is a ripple. For every success they believe they have purchased, there is an unseen cost, a hidden backlash, a consequence lurking in the corners of existence, waiting to make itself known in ways they cannot measure. They imagine the future as theirs to mold, but the moment the deal is made, the future starts to move on its own. And that movement is not theirs to command. They make deals thinking they are clever, thinking they are untouchable, thinking they have accounted for every variable. They sit there with their pens and their papers, their whispers and their nods, thinking that foresight is theirs, that planning is enough. But foresight is an illusion. Planning is fragile. And the universe has a wicked sense of humor. It loves to take every calculated move and bend it, twist it, distort it, until the plan collapses like a house of cards, leaving only the aftermath for them to witness. And that aftermath, it is beautiful in its inevitability, because it is the reminder that consequences never sleep, consequences never forget, consequences never fail to arrive. They underestimate the subtlety of consequences. They imagine them as direct, linear, measurable. They believe that if they calculate, they can predict. If they negotiate, they can control. If they plan, they can avoid disaster. But consequences are clever. They hide in shadows. They wait for the moment of arrogance, the moment of blind confidence, the moment when someone believes they are untouchable. They appear where they are least expected, strike where defenses are weakest, and unravel everything with a precision that is terrifying in its inevitability. Every deal made without respect for hidden costs is a ticking clock, a slow fuse, a time bomb waiting to prove a lesson that cannot be ignored. They do not see how far the ripples travel. They do not see how a small compromise here can become a catastrophe there. They do not see how a promise made in secrecy, a manipulation thought harmless, A transaction assumed safe can twist and spread into outcomes they never imagined. They fail to see that life does not forgive shortcuts, that reality does not negotiate loopholes, that the universe does not honor intentions when consequences demand their due. Every action carries a shadow, every decision a footprint, every deal a debt that must be paid in one way or another. They assume control over the outcome, but control is a lie. They imagine that cleverness can outsmart inevitability, that skill can escape cause and effect, that planning can dodge the long arm of consequence. But reality is patient, cunning, and relentless. It waits. It watches. And when the moment is right, it delivers in full measure, exposing the folly of those who believed they could bind life to their will. They think they are untouchable, but every deal is a reminder that nothing is without cost, nothing is without consequence, nothing is without a response from the world they cannot control. They laugh at the idea of hidden consequences, scoff at the warnings, dismiss the whispers of doubt. But consequences are the quiet smile behind every success, the shadow behind every gain, the invisible hand guiding the fallout that they cannot see. They think they are in command, but the moment they make the deal, the moment they shake hands, the moment they think they have the upper hand, the world begins to write its own story. A story that includes the cost they never accounted for, the twists they never predicted, the reckoning they cannot avoid. Every deal carries hidden consequences, waiting, lurking, invisible, inevitable, ready to reveal itself at the perfect, most inconvenient moment to remind those who believe in control that control is a myth, a fragile illusion, a joke played by reality on those who think they are clever enough to escape its reach. They sit there in their glass towers, behind polished desks, behind the illusion of control, thinking they are untouchable, thinking they have all the answers, thinking that the world bends to their cleverness. They do not see you. They do not see the way your eyes follow the currents of their schemes, how your mind traces every move, how your instincts whisper truths they hope you won't notice. They underestimate your awareness, your ability to see what they try to hide, to feel what they try to mask, to understand what they hope remains invisible. They believe because they have planned, because they have schemed, because they have whispered words in secret, that you cannot grasp the full picture, that you cannot perceive the lines they have drawn in the sand, that you cannot sense the game they believe they are winning. But they are wrong. They assume that because they act in shadows, because they manipulate behind closed doors, because they sign deals that they think are untouchable, that no one is watching. They forget that awareness does not require visibility, that perception does not require permission, that power often resides in the quiet observation, in the patient understanding, in the subtle recognition of patterns they believed would go unnoticed. They assume ignorance where there is insight. They assume weakness where there is strength. They assume that control is theirs alone, blind to the fact that observation is power and knowledge. Knowledge is a weapon they cannot wield against you because you have always held it. They think their cleverness is the ultimate advantage, that their confidence is impenetrable, that their arrogance is shielded from scrutiny. But arrogance is a lantern that exposes itself to anyone willing to watch, to anyone willing to wait, to anyone willing to see. They believe they are ahead because they measure moves, because they calculate risk, because they manipulate outcomes. They do not see the truth that power is not in calculation alone. Power is in understanding, in awareness, in the ability to perceive intentions, to read between lines, to feel the currents that flow beneath the surface. And you do that. You see, you understand, you feel. They underestimate the quiet storm that grows in the margins, the subtle force that waits unseen until it is undeniable, the awareness that turns observation into action, perception into strategy, patience into reckoning. They believe that because they have planned, because they have executed, because they have controlled the environment, that outcomes are fixed, that you are contained, that resistance is impossible. But you are neither fixed nor contained, and your awareness transforms every underestimation into an opportunity, every miscalculation into leverage, every act of arrogance into a mistake they cannot undo. They assume that their schemes are invisible, that their power is untouchable, that their influence is absolute. But they forget that power is not measured by what one controls. It is measured by the effect one has, the awareness one commands, the presence one asserts. They forget that underestimation is a tool of the arrogant, a gift to those who are patient, a crack through which understanding slips like light through a broken window. They do not see that your awareness is a mirror, reflecting every intention, every calculation, every hidden agenda, back to them in ways they do not anticipate. They move like shadows, thinking silence is strength, thinking secrecy is mastery, thinking their cunning is superior. But they fail to recognize that observation is not passive, that understanding is not neutral, that awareness is not weakness. Every move they make, every deal they sign, every whisper they utter is registered, cataloged, understood. They underestimate the quiet calculation that happens in the minds of those who are awake, the deliberate patience of those who are aware, the potential unleashed when insight meets resolve. They believe ignorance is inevitable, but it is never yours to grant. They assume that power resides solely in action, in execution, in manipulation. But they do not see that true power often resides in the subtle, the patient, the perceptive. They do not see that your awareness is a force they cannot negotiate with, a weapon they cannot disarm, a truth they cannot avoid. And it grows quietly, invisibly, until the moment it is undeniable, until the moment it becomes impossible for them to ignore, until the moment your understanding turns the tide of every scheme, every plan, every illusion they thought was safe. They underestimate your patience, your perception, your ability to recognize patterns, to anticipate consequences, to turn observation into leverage. They think because they are bold, because they are loud, because they act decisively, that they are ahead. But boldness without awareness is arrogance. Loudness without perception is folly. Decisiveness without understanding is disaster waiting to happen. And you watch, you wait, you understand. Your awareness is the shadow behind their bravado, the hand behind the curtain, the storm waiting silently until the perfect moment. They do not see it. They do not expect it. They do not anticipate it. And in their underestimation lies their weakness, their vulnerability, their downfall. Because power, true power, does not always shout. True power watches, listens, learns, and waits. They assume ignorance where there is understanding. They assume weakness where there is strength. They underestimate you, and that is exactly what makes you unstoppable. Trust is such a fragile thing, isn't it? They sit there, smiling, shaking hands, whispering promises, as if words alone can bind the world. They hand over assurances like candy, like gifts, like shields, expecting obedience, expecting loyalty, expecting compliance. But trust is a living thing, delicate, unpredictable, and they fail to see that it is not theirs to command. And betrayal. Betrayal waits quietly in the shadows, in the corners of every deal, in the silence behind every smile, in the cracks of every promise they think is unbreakable. They believe that when trust is given, it is absolute, permanent, unquestionable. But trust is fragile, and betrayal is patient. They make promises with confidence, believing that their words are enough to bind people to them. They think that deals, agreements, contracts, and gestures of goodwill are shields against deception, that trust is a currency they can mint at will. But they forget the very nature of human instinct, the instinct to test, to question, to doubt. They forget that behind every handshake is a calculation, behind every smile is scrutiny, behind every nod is judgment. And in that scrutiny, in that calculation, in that judgment, betrayal often takes root quietly, invisibly, waiting for the precise moment to reveal itself in full force. They underestimate the duality of human connection. Trust is given, yes, but it is earned continuously, measured against actions, against intentions, against outcomes. They imagine it is a one-time transaction, a single hand extended, a single word spoken, a single signature made. They do not see that every action has consequences. Every word carries weight. Every silence speaks volumes. And it is in the spaces between actions, in the pauses, in the unspoken truths, that betrayal gathers strength. Trust and betrayal are never far apart. They walk together, one step behind the other, one hiding while the other reveals, one building the illusion while the other waits to shatter it. They think that because they are clever, because they are meticulous, because they have arranged everything with precision, they can avoid betrayal, that trust will always work in their favor. They fail to see that trust is not a tool to be wielded, not a lever to manipulate, not a shield against consequence. Trust is a bond, delicate, fragile, invisible, yet powerful. And betrayal is the shadow that comes with every bond, the silent twin that always follows, the hidden cost they never accounted for. They forget that no matter how confident, no matter how cunning, no matter how certain, the human heart is unpredictable, the mind is clever, the instincts are ruthless when tested. They make deals, thinking loyalty is guaranteed, thinking obedience is natural, thinking promises are ironclad. But loyalty is conditional, obedience is fleeting, promises are only as strong as the integrity of the person behind them. They do not see the subtle signals, the micro moments, the tiny cracks in behavior that betray intentions. They cannot read the way hesitation lingers, the way glances shift, the way silence stretches, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. And betrayal does not announce itself. It creeps, it grows, it waits, and then, when the timing is perfect, it strikes with precision that is terrifying in its inevitability. They assume that they are untouchable, that trust is a one-way street flowing to them alone, that others are blind to their schemes. But trust is fragile, yes, and betrayal is clever. Betrayal sees what they do not, understands what they ignore, anticipates what they cannot predict. They imagine control, but the more they try to control trust, the more they expose themselves to its consequences. They believe in loyalty as a guarantee, but loyalty is not a given. It is a delicate balance, a living force, a variable as unpredictable as the human heart. And betrayal knows exactly when to tip the balance. They rely on appearances, on gestures, on formalities, on the illusion of faith. They believe that by constructing careful facades, by hiding intentions, by orchestrating impressions, they can avoid the sting of betrayal, that trust will always be their ally. But appearances are hollow. Gestures can deceive, facades crumble, and betrayal hides in the hollow spaces, in the shadows of appearances, in the silence between words. It waits for the opportune moment, for the one chance to prove that trust is never absolute, that loyalty is never guaranteed, that consequences are never avoidable. They forget the most important truth, that trust and betrayal are intrinsically linked. Where trust is given, betrayal is always a possibility. Where promises are made, the risk of deceit follows. Where hearts are open, the shadows linger. And it is in that tension, in that dance, in that constant push and pull between giving and guarding, that true power lies. They do not see it, but you do. You see the patterns. You sense the intentions. You feel the undercurrents. You understand that trust is a weapon, a mirror, a test, and that betrayal is the force that reveals the truth behind every mask, every word, every deal. They underestimate the inevitability of betrayal, the quiet patience with which it moves, the cunning with which it waits. They underestimate the human spirit's ability to react when trust is violated, when promises are broken, when intentions are revealed. They think they can manipulate. They think they can deceive. They think they can control the outcome. But in the interplay of trust and betrayal, they are merely players, blind to the currents that flow beneath the surface, unaware of the forces that will inevitably test, challenge, and overturn their illusions. Trust and betrayal are never far apart, intertwined like shadows and light, inseparable, inevitable, waiting, watching, ready to reveal truths, to teach lessons, to expose weaknesses, to change the game entirely. And they fail to see it coming.